Alright guys, back from ITNation. One hell of a week, to be honest. Felt a little different than some ITNations that I've been to in the past, and it doesn't surprise me. We're getting to that point, and I think I've saw it mentioned a few times, where we really are hitting a new maturity step as a channel, right? We're not having, back when I first started going to ITNation back way early, probably 2012, 2013, but I've drank a lot since then, where we were all just trying to figure it out, right? We were all kind of growing and evolving together on what questions were important, which kind of brings me to why I'm recording this video and not just posting on LinkedIn. One of my new BFFs, Josh Kotler, fantastic guy. Go follow him on LinkedIn, as he's really figured out some of these financial ideas when growing and scaling an MSP. But he posted something that, a little bit of humor, a little bit of satire, but a lot of bit of truth that I want to just share my opinions with you today. And then I'm going to read this verbatim. And right, he says, it normally takes a few days or weeks for the takeaways to really gel. But one thing that stood out for me, so many exhausted 50-year-old guys, next year's show should add an AARP booth, a pickleball tournament, and a kiosk where you can get your testosterone levels checked. Now, when he said this, my brain snowballed. I'm not gonna lie. I literally had this moment in time. I remember I was on the plane yesterday, and I just started to go, what questions should this make us ask? What type of cast could this add to our mindsets, our content, who we cater toward in the channel? And I could tell you right now, I also heard that quite a bit while I was there, and I just want to give you guys some of my thoughts on this. So let's roll the intro and let's get to it. Now guys, just to get this out of the way, this is just an off-the-cuff, hit record, see what comes out of my mouth, a little bit of editing. But so there's not really gonna be too many takeaways, but I want your guys' feedback, right? I want to continue this discussion. Now, for years, I've gotten a lot of shit for being the young guy in the old man's group, right? I started real young, you guys know the story, and I just never had that opportunity to run with my age range. And I'll be quite honest, as I've kind of gone through this journey, I've had a lot of conversations on what's been successful, what's not been successful, and also starting to see the younger generation, I've coached quite a few of them at this point, on what they are struggling with. Now, a lot of times when this conversation's been happening, right, they tell me a lot of their goals. You know, I want fast scale, I want to grow, I need my EBITDA, that damn word, to be 20, 25, 30, because that's what I hear is success. Now, when we start to look at that community, like where are they hearing some of this information, there's this generational gap between their journey in learning versus what they're being told they need to achieve. Or I think there's some disparagement right there, right? Because if I am on my journey over the next 5 to 10 years, my business is going to need that same iterative improvement that may have different goals than someone that has gone through that last 10 years of iterative improvement that they may be looking to achieve. And we need to keep in mind when we start building content and education around what MSPs need. And we're so often, we try to put ourselves into these molds of what I need to do in my business, and we get stuck in these like mode theories. Now, this isn't to pick on service leadership. I agree with mode theories to begin with, but there's variableness within each of those maturity stages. And you may have seen one of the cybersecurity ones that Wes and I came up with to talk about how you should think about your MSP from a revenue perspective in maturity, not a ideal stage in maturity. And right, some of the things we talked about was, when is it the right time to make investments? When is the right time to outsource or offshore some of these? When is the right time to add a new product or service? Because at some points in time, you may not have the profitability, or it may not be the right time to increase your profitability to get there. Now, you guys have heard it before. One of the things I commonly talk about is, right, net profit shouldn't always be the goal. Now, I know that at its core sounds very controversial or clickbaity, but really what that comes from is, if I'm trying to achieve rapid scale in my business, I may be investing a higher percentage of revenue into sales or marketing because I understand my customer acquisition costs in what that's going to take. So what becomes more important is the gross profitability of my business to make sure that I, as an owner, have a healthy bottom line, but maybe not a best-in-class bottom line. And this is stuff that we need to think about, because if you are a young entrepreneur, right, you're in your mid-20s, early 30s. I think I saw recent statistics that some of the more successful entrepreneurs start between 31 and 35, right? That they have to go through their own journey of getting their business, where you are going to have some years where, your profitability on the bottom isn't that great. However, you're making those investments to grow and scale. Now, last week at ITNation, I saw a lot of conversation and a lot of sessions even about getting prepared for sale or getting prepared for post-sale, right? What does your life look like? And I gotta wonder, and I would love feedback on this. If you are a young MSP, what type of preconceived notions it's going to give you about what the goals of your MSP should be, right? I see so often that we all think that the goal of my business is to sell it. Therefore, I may be thinking that I always need to sell it between 3, 5, and 7 years. And I think we skip a pivotal section in how we mature this conversation. And to not beat around the bush, that's not the journey you are going to face when you are 31 to 35, right? You're gonna have to put in 10, 15, 20 years of your services business, and you can live a very good lifestyle, right? You can hire a CEO, you can build a mechanism to where you live through the distributions as a silent partner. We've hit the zeitgeist to where, just accept it. You're gonna fucking hate your MSP and you just need to live with it, right? If you're a young entrepreneur, you can have different ideas and measurements of success in your business. Now, granted, this is just a snowball opinion, a snowball thought, so I don't wanna get too into it. But what I want to do is unpack this for a moment. I want to talk about some of the things that go into my head when we see all this content, right? Basically, this is leaving us with the assumption that you are going to have to sell your MSP. Now, in a thriving M&A market like what we have right now, this is totally okay. However, I did hear quite a few PE-backed MSPs that do have a platform where they mentioned it's really hard for them to find a seller right now. So, right, the inventory is starting to dry up. Well, if the inventory is starting to drive up, that means the private equity-based MSPs are going to have to start making different profit levels to make sure that their investors get the shareholder returns that they expect. Or on the other side, for those that are sellers right now, supply and demand, you're gonna have a record high price than you've ever had before. But also with declining economy and also with some really high interest rates, where is that going to land some of this market, right? Not everybody may be able to sell or afford to be able to buy. So, right, that means the big are going to continue to get bigger and the smalls are going to have to just sustain themselves on their own. Interesting, right? Now, I don't have a solution or a thought where this goes in, but what do we do? How do we change the narrative? How do we change education to help those MSPs that aren't going to be able to sell to sustain a healthy lifestyle, right, for both their team and themselves? Now, one of my buddies and I, Robert Chaffee, we did have a great conversation after hours. I think we were in the hotel lobby until like 1 in the morning, having conversation about this. And the EBITDA obsession also creates an interesting bottleneck in the growth rates of MSPs. Now, in the last service leadership research that I've looked at, most MSPs, right, they're only in that 10 to 12% year-over-year growth range, which is totally okay. However, a lot of them are only spending 4 to 5% of their revenue on sales teams, because ultimately that gets you that one person. However, when you look at MSPs that are in that 20 to 30% growth range, right, they're thinking in terms of what is my sales budget to achieve the revenue goals that I am looking to achieve. Now, not getting too deep into this, right, we need to decide, do I take a haircut? Right? Do I drop my net profit? Do I increase my gross profit to allow myself a little bit more cheddar? All of those are correct answers. However, the logic isn't start with EBITDA and work your way back to sales. The logic is start with how much you want to grow and then work yourself backwards. And you guys saw this in our budgeting conversation. So when we were discussing, right, I think we were discussing what his growth looks like for next year. I had challenged him with, why are we talking about EBITDA when you have a revenue target, right? Shouldn't we be talking about what it's going to take for you to invest to achieve that top line goal, and then have conversations about where your gross margin needs to go and where you need to reduce some general and administrative fees to then land a net profit that you as a shareholder would be completely okay with, right? That's kind of the education that we need to ramp into. especially for those young MSPs in that first 5 years, right? You just want to stay above water. You want to get to a revenue level to where you can pay everybody fairly, and there's going to be a lot of actionables that are taken into it. Now, ultimately what this meant, right, is we can't be talking about EBITDA if we want to grow our business. Now, they can be in tandem, and I know the way I said that sounds extremely controversial, but at the end of the day, right, it's the top line revenue that gets us the ability to afford a lot more. And when you're younger in your business, right, we can't be so focused on the bottom line, right? We need to be focused on what gets us to a point where we have enough team members that I can start delegating and really building a business. And with all the new threat actors that are out there and all the cybersecurity that's focused, I'm eventually going to need to build a cybersecurity practice to take care of my customers, and that's going to require growth, right? I don't care what your EBITDA is. If you hit 22%, but you're only a $2 million business, I still don't have enough money in my accounts to build these types of services. I'm going to always have to offshore them or outsource them to some type of a provider, which isn't bad as a stopgap. But if I'm truly going to build a scalable business, right, I gotta have something in the tank to then be able to bring on people to take away from my clients that are already, right, paying for those services, because I need to really keep in mind that churn always exists. And if churn always exists, growth always needs to exist. Why do we obsess about this? Because we aren't teaching the narratives and the education for the young entrepreneurs to understand the only way you build your business is through new customers buying your managed service agreements. You get the point. And then here's something else we want to think about, right? In that AARP section, we have a lot of guys that are getting to a point where they are starting to age out. So while they age out, they are selling their businesses to some of these PE-backed MSPs. Now, what I've seen time and time again is they go through the exit and then they don't know what to do after, or they don't recognize that the price that they sold their business for didn't give them enough of a return to retire. Now, why did they not get enough to return to retire? Right? A lot of times we think in terms of these percentages getting us these multiples, but we don't think in terms of dollars of those multiples that is going to go into our life planning, right? The last thing I heard, and I don't know if there's any validity to it, 250 grand a year for you to be able to retire. 250K a year, right? 5 years is gonna be $1 million. So we need to keep those things in mind when we go to retire of, can I sustain what I am looking to do? Or does my business need to operate at a level to where I don't have to be too involved in it, to where someone else can run it for me, to where then I can take some money out of the business to semi-retire for an eventual exit, especially if the economy is going to show us that, selling may not be the right idea. Now, that's just additional idea. That's not me saying that that's the only exit, but right, there's just things that we need to start internalizing. Now, with that being said, right, if we know that also these generational things are starting to happen, right, what about things like succession? We've seen it in the copier world and in the voice world. It is possible to hand your business off to the next generation, right? Either that be your kids, so an operator in your business, right? Those things are possible, and I've seen them done extremely well. But beyond that, what education are they receiving to be able to take that business off their hands? Honestly, this is one of the reasons why when Alex West and I were so excited about this empath idea, that we really wanted to get away from thought leadership, because there are multiple ways to handle this, but also multiple perspectives. Now, here's some other things to think about, right? If I'm a young entrepreneur that has an MSP and I'm in peer groups where I want to interact with other young MSP owners, I have the ability to say, we have a bunch of MSP owners, we're all been owning less than 5 years, let's all go on this journey together and have someone facilitate that can course correct where needed. Again, not that that would be a great idea, but just things to think about, because they're going to be listening differently than some of the older generation. And when you start to homogenize that, now we have people talking about aging out and retiring, and people that are 30, 35 going, I still got 20, 30, 40 years left in my career. What am I supposed to do? Why am I sitting in these entire sessions talking about what happens after you exit? It's going to be demoralizing. You're going to be sitting there going, man, everyone's living great lives, but it's an interesting mind shift that's going to happen. So what that means is we need to start creating that education. But what does that do to the channel as a whole, right? If we know most of them are in this age bracket, right? The marketing of some of these vendors, how they build their products, how they structure their pricing and their agreements, right? These are all going to be structured around that target audience. And that's going to give us a bias. And that bias, while I don't really have a total thought on if it's dangerous or detrimental to the younger generation, it's something to consider, right? I would love to know some of your thoughts on that matter, because does it feel that way? So with all that said, right, I am predicting that there is going to be a little bit of a shift in the market over the next few years as people start to age out, especially in the M&A market, right? When we're looking at consolidation. Now, granted, there's many MSPs. Last thing I heard was 60,000 MSPs in North America, right, for it to be purchased. But how many of those are still 10, 15, 20 years away from being even something that I would want to buy? It's an interesting thought. Is that going to slow down the market? Are those other complications of some of the commodity we've seen with help desk, is that going to create a shift in our market? And I think it's going to, right? And this is kind of the thought that I had earlier. They're going to have to start going after market share of customers, not of MSPs, which means pricing is going to come down, right? Which may start to have us look a little bit like financial services with bookkeeping, fractional CFO, and accounting services, to where they are a lot lower price. Because over generations, it's had to go to lower price. What's that gonna do to everything? It's a fascinating thought. But also, right, if we think of it over the last 10 years, most of these MSPs in the early 2010s were about in those 40, 45-year age ranges, right? That education evolved with them. Is there going to be a 2-3 year stopgap where the education is going to have to evolve for the younger generation over the next 5 to 10 years? Which means it may be 10, 15 years before they catch up and we repeat this entire cycle. Now, this is something that I'm gonna focus on a little bit, especially with the content that we're gonna be putting out in Empath, because, right, young entrepreneurs have a different lessons that they are going to have to learn that are either gonna be catered or it's just gonna be learned through experiences. So where can we start to have those conversations, right? Things like basic, like how to read a P&L, how to read a balance sheet. What the hell's the difference between the two? Why would I invest in the bottom line versus sales and marketing versus COGS, right? Where do those things start to happen? For a lot of us, we go, oh yeah, we already know this because we've been hearing about it for the last 10 years, which means the content dries up, which means in peer groups, the content doesn't come up. We just wait for them to fall in the hole and we go, oh yeah, we experienced that too. We can't let that happen. I'm really curious on this, and I could be completely wrong, by the way. So, anywho, guys, I'm gonna cut this video here. I do really appreciate you listening, right? And I encourage you to push back on any of the bullshit that I just said, right? For those of you that are still interested, by the way, we did move the podcast to a new platform, Crowdcast. Elephant in the Room is what we named it. Super excited. Go register, as now it's 100% collaborative, even if we're not live streaming. So it's super fun. I think the next episode we are going to be doing is on how to build your employee onboarding process, right? Well, education is super pivotal. It's a follow-up from the ITNation session, as well as the one we did with Wes, so look out for that episode. And other than that, guys, I look forward to seeing your feedback. Hope you're all having a great week and got home safely from ITNation. See you all later.